Some Navy men were about to get into serious trouble simply for discovering a strange submarine that showed up from nowhere. "Just another day on the water," the captain muttered as the Seahawk crew patrolled the shoreline. This was normal work for the Coast Guard crew, something they'd done many times before. Their task was simple: keep the sea safe and check anything unusual. For these sailors, the ocean was always risky, especially when working right on it. "Always respect the sea," the older officer would tell new team members. "She gives life, but can take it just as fast." Even with all their training, they knew to both respect and fear the water. The ocean always kept secrets, some darker than people could imagine. Perfect weather could change in moments, but it wasn't bad weather that would shock these sailors today. What was hidden under the calm water was something nobody could have expected. Everything seemed normal until someone watching the radar noticed something strange. A faint sound on the sonar that barely showed on their screens. "Captain, I'm picking up something weird," called the radar operator. "It's faint, but definitely there." First, they thought it was just equipment not working right, but since they were nearby, they decided to check it out. As they went toward the spot, one Coast Guard member saw a bright blue object far away. The crew knew they needed to investigate. As the Seahawk got closer, they could see the floating object better. At first, they thought it might be trash or a small boat, but something seemed wrong about it. Its blue metal surface seemed made to blend with the water, like it was hiding. "That's military design if I've ever seen one," whispered the first mate. This was worrying, and made it hard to spot against the ocean. It looked like the kind of boat made for secret missions. Making things stranger, their radar couldn't track it properly. The object kept appearing and disappearing from their system, with only the Seahawk staying visible on their screens. It was almost like the floating object wasn't really there. With no markings, lights, or movement, the crew worried it might be dangerous. They tried radio contact, but got nothing back, not even static. The object seemed dead in the water. Getting closer, they saw more details. The ship was bigger than it first looked. Its long shape, smooth outside, and weird lines didn't match any normal ship design. Finally, the captain ordered them to move in for a better look. "Approach carefully," he ordered. "Something's not right about this one." They tried throwing a hook line to pull the object toward the Seahawk, which was standard practice. But despite their efforts, the object didn't move. Instead, something strange happened. When they pulled, it was their ship that started moving toward the object. "What the hell?" shouted the winch operator. "It's pulling us instead." That's when they realized it was much heavier than they thought. Given the situation, the captain chose 2 men, Marcus and David, to board the mystery vessel. "Be careful in there," the captain warned. "Radio check every 5 minutes." With flashlights, tools, and radios, the 2 Coast Guard members climbed onto the object. Up close, it looked even weirder. Walking across the metal deck, they found a hatch on top. Carefully, Marcus and David opened it. The lid made a loud creaking noise in the quiet air, showing a narrow passage into the ship. "After you," David said with a nervous smile. Shining lights inside, they saw a rusty ladder going down into darkness. The 2 men looked at each other but decided to go ahead. Going deeper into the ship, they realized it was an abandoned submarine, cold, oppressive, with a metal smell and scary silence that made every sound louder. The metal walls were rusty and damp, looking long neglected, even though the outside seemed fine. The air got thicker with each step, like there was something more than just air in the room. Their flashlights showed a main control panel that looked straight out of an old 80s movie, old buttons, levers, and tangled wires. "This tech is ancient," whispered Marcus, running his fingers over the dusty controls. There were signs people had been there before, but clearly nobody had died inside. There were no bodies and no clues about the submarine's last mission. Suddenly, a sharp noise came from above. Marcus and David looked up quickly, but before they could react, the hatch slammed shut with a bang. "No!" David yelled, rushing toward the ladder. They immediately tried calling the Seahawk, but got no signal. Meanwhile, the crew on the ship could do nothing as the closed hatch cut Marcus and David off from help. Then the sub started vibrating, not violently, but steadily, which immediately worried the two men. "Can you feel that?" Marcus asked, his voice tense. They sensed what was happening, and before they fully understood, the vessel began slowly sinking. That's when Marcus and David, trapped inside, felt the increasing pressure around them. The Seahawk lost all sight and radar contact with the submarine, going from spotty signals to nothing. The scared Coast Guard crew on the ship could only watch helplessly as their friends vanished into the deep ocean, fearing they might never see Marcus and David again. But if the fear outside was bad, what was happening inside was even more terrifying. Despite everything, Marcus and David tried to stay calm as they kept exploring. "We need to find the control room," David said firmly. "That's our only way out of this." They knew the sub was sinking, but in a strange way. There were no water leaks, no creaking or noises showing structural damage. This gave them a small bit of comfort. As Marcus checked the walls and console, he suddenly realized something. This sub was designed to avoid detection. "It's a stealth submarine," he said, eyes widening with realization. It was obvious now. His friend pointed out they'd noticed that from the start, though Marcus seemed to just realize it. Looking for answers, they came to a metal door at the corridor's end. Behind that door, they thought they might find the key to understanding the ship's purpose, or maybe something much scarier. Hours passed as the sub kept moving underwater. Marcus and David pushed on through the dim corridors, getting more worried. "The air's getting thin," Marcus coughed. "We need to find oxygen soon." The air felt thick and heavy, probably because of limited air supply in the ship. Walking through the cold metal corridors, they found themselves going in circles, realizing they weren't getting anywhere. They decided to check the machinery, hoping to turn on something that might bring the sub back up. The technology was basic: control panels with exposed wires, and sealed compartments with no clear use. They felt the sub vibrate through the water again, but differently this time, almost like it was slowly rising. "Do you feel that?" David asked. "I think we're going up." This gave them brief hope, but something still seemed wrong. There were still no signs of leaks or damage, which made them uneasy. Shadows seemed to stretch in the corners, playing tricks on their minds. Then they found something that made them frown. There was a hidden panel covered with old dust. When they opened it with a grating sound, they saw what was inside. Equipment clearly meant for military use, though outdated, with markings showing it had been there longer than it should have. "This stuff looks Cold War era," Marcus muttered, examining the faded markings. But that wasn't all. At the back of the compartment, they found a large sealed box that didn't look like it held supplies. Curious, they decided to open it, and what they found inside deeply disturbed them. Packages wrapped in black plastic, marked in a way that strongly suggested they contained drugs, lots of drugs. "So, that's what this is all about," David said grimly. "A drug smuggling operation." This discovery changed everything they thought they understood about the submarine. Now they realized its true purpose and why it was drifting abandoned. For a moment, they thought the thick air, vibrating environment, and their growing discomfort came from this shocking discovery. They dramatically thought they were having an emotional shock, but they were completely wrong. The thick air was from lack of oxygen, and the vibrations weren't just background noise. They were the final moments of the submarine rising to the surface. "We're surfacing!" Marcus shouted, gripping a handrail. The vibration they felt in the hull made them think they'd escape the crushing water pressure, but their relief didn't last. As the sub emerged from the depths, they saw something more unreal than anything before. A massive, floating platform surrounded by water loomed in front of them. It looked like an offshore oil rig. Marcus and David had no idea where they were. There was no land for miles, which was overwhelming, but the most striking thing was the sheer size of this huge floating structure. "What the hell is that?" whispered David, peering through a small viewport. Overcome with fear, the two men quickly hid, crouching behind the submarine's control console. They heard men opening hatches and banging on the rusty steel as they climbed inside. "Don't make a sound," Marcus warned, pulling David deeper into the shadows. It was clear these workers came from the rig. Soon they began unloading heavy crates from the submarine and taking them to the floating structure. The work was steady and unhurried, making Marcus and David even more anxious. They had to stay hidden for what seemed like forever, watching these men work, praying they wouldn't be found, and hoping the ship would eventually leave. As crates piled up on the ground, Marcus and David watched in growing horror. The cargo wasn't just supplies or equipment, it was tons of cash and drugs, all illegal and connected to criminals. "That's enough product to supply an entire state," David breathed, eyes wide. The rig workers moved calmly, like what they were doing was just routine, but for the two Coast Guard members this was a completely foreign and frightening world. One wrong move could mean they'd never see anything again. Both men were terrified. Even though they were Coast Guard with some military training, they were just two against many, putting them in serious danger. It wasn't the danger of dying underwater, but the fear of being discovered and tortured. Making things worse, being military men meant they couldn't just be threatened and released. "If they find us, we're dead," Marcus stated flatly. They knew they'd be killed if caught. Their only hope was making sure they weren't seen at all. Not even the smallest hint of their presence could be revealed. All they could do was watch from the shadows, praying to remain just shadows. They both clearly felt one thing, the overwhelming need to escape. They knew they were seeing something they were never supposed to see, but where could they run? They were stranded in the middle of the ocean. Swimming wasn't possible. The best hope was to be patient, wait for workers to load the next shipment, and sneak away when they reached an island. But more importantly, they had evidence. If they could seize the sub or plant a tracker on it, they'd have enough to end this drug operation. "This could be the biggest bust of our careers," Marcus whispered, "if we survive." Still, hiding carried constant risk of discovery. At any moment, the workers unloading crates could find them. The two Coast Guards felt time pressing against them. One bold option was to come out of hiding, get into the tower, and look for some kind of ship to escape. But that was just as dangerous. They were running out of options. The best plan seemed to be waiting for a chance to get off the submarine and hope they wouldn't end up somewhere worse. As time passed, their urgency grew. Should they escape to save their lives, or stay and risk everything to gather crucial evidence that could bring down this criminal operation? Their choices seemed limited. They made the bold decision to carefully leave their hiding spot and gather more information, even if just to find an approximate location for backup. Stepping outside, they found themselves in a huge metal structure lit by bright lights cutting through the ocean darkness around them. Waves crashed loudly against the metal pillars. They realized they were indeed on an old oil rig, now used for smuggling. But they had what they needed: their communicators. "Signals back," David exclaimed quietly, checking his device. Now above sea level, they could call for help. They stayed hidden, moving carefully to avoid being seen, looking not only for useful information but also a way to contact their base for help. If they were smart, things could get easier. They kept moving, taking advantage of everyone, focusing on unloading the drugs. The operation was overseen by a well-dressed, elegant man who stood out from the other workers. "That must be the boss," Marcus whispered, pointing discreetly. The place was clearly quite empty. It was obviously only used for transport, and there were no communication devices showing the submarine controllers were elsewhere. Confident now, they decided to call their ship and explain what was happening. Finding the location wasn't hard. They knew there weren't many underwater oil rigs in the area, and they knew exactly which one had been taken over. So, all they had to do was wait for help. Luckily, they weren't far away, and within minutes they saw the smugglers start panicking. The Seahawk was heading straight for them, causing chaos. "Look!" David pointed excitedly. "The cavalry's arrived." Soon, the smugglers ordered the ship to stop or they'd use weapons. The smugglers had no choice but to surrender, and eventually authorities arrested them all. As a result, Marcus and David were celebrated as heroes and returned home alive. Next time, Marcus joked as they headed back to shore, "Let's stick to rescuing stranded boaters." Did you like this story? Would you have been brave enough to hide from dangerous criminals on an offshore oil rig like Marcus and David did? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this high seas adventure, subscribe to this channel and leave a like. Even a routine coastal patrol can suddenly turn into a dangerous encounter with international drug traffickers that tests your courage and resourcefulness. Thanks so much for listening. See you in the next story. Have a great day.